The desert mountains stand exposed beneath relentless sunlight. Rock surfaces absorb heat throughout the day, releasing it slowly as temperatures fall, leaving little relief even after night arrives. Wind moves across the slopes, carrying dust instead of moisture. There is no visible water, no continuous shade, and no shelter for large bodies. Vegetation survives only in narrow cracks where thin soil gathers. Growth is sparse and fragile, shaped by evaporation and heat rather than rain. Shadows retreat quickly, and open ground offers no concealment. Any movement across these slopes becomes immediately visible. In this landscape, danger does not rely on pursuit. It is built into the terrain. Descending from the cliffs means exposure. Remaining above means endurance under constant heat. Water appears only briefly after rare storms, collecting in shallow depressions before disappearing again. These sites never change. Their predictability makes them unavoidable and risky. They draw attention in an environment where attention carries consequence. Yet signs of repeated movement mark the rock faces. Narrow paths cross steep cliffs, suggesting that a large species moves through this terrain without relying on frequent access to water. Survival here does not depend on abundance, but on precision. The desert sets strict limits. Those that persist do so by aligning with absence, by knowing when not to move, and how long thirst can be delayed. In the desert of stone, endurance begins before water is ever sought. Within this environment lives a species adapted to limits rather than abundance. The Nubian ibex is built for stability on rock. Its body is compact and balanced, supported by hooves shaped to grip narrow ledges and angled surfaces. Movement across steep terrain is controlled and efficient, reducing the risk of slips where recovery is impossible. This species occupies a vertical niche. Instead of wide plains, it relies on cliffs and broken slopes that restrict access for competitors and predators alike. Height provides security, not through isolation, but through difficulty. Few threats can maintain pursuit on such terrain. Food resources are scarce and scattered. Desert plants grow slowly, anchored in thin soils where moisture is minimal. Feeding routes are therefore precise, following established paths refined over time. Movement between feeding points minimizes exposure while conserving energy. Despite its size, the Nubian ibex limits contact with open water. Descending toward water sources requires leaving protective rock faces and entering exposed ground where visibility increases and escape options narrow. For this species, water represents both necessity and risk. Physiological efficiency supports extended intervals without drinking. Moisture obtained from vegetation, combined with regulated activity, allows survival under sustained heat. This strategy reduces the frequency with which danger must be faced. Within the desert ecosystem, the Nubian ibex converts limited plant life into a stable presence while remaining difficult to access. Survival is not based on dominance, but on remaining aligned with the terrain's constraints. In the desert mountains, water defines movement more than any predator. Natural water sources are rare, exposed, and fixed in place. Reaching them requires descent from the cliffs into open terrain where cover disappears and visibility increases. For the Nubian ibex, approaching water is delayed as long as conditions allow. Remaining above reduces exposure but increases physiological strain. The balance between these pressures shifts with temperature and season, narrowing the window for safe access. Predators exploit this geography. They wait near water rather than pursue the cliffs. Visibility favors patience, and predictability simplifies risk. Drinking events are brief and infrequent. Entry routes favor steep or broken terrain that limits pursuit. Time spent near water is reduced to essential moments only. Avoidance, not confrontation, governs behavior. This conflict unfolds quietly. There is no chase, only restraint. Survival depends on managing thirst without creating opportunity for exposure. Here, water is not a refuge. It is a calculated risk. Avoiding open water requires an alternative. Across the cliffs, plants retain trace moisture gathered from early condensation and minimal humidity. This water never accumulates. It exists in small quantities, dispersed across elevation and terrain. The Nubian ibex structures its foraging around these limits. Feeding routes remain high on the rock faces where temperatures are slightly lower and evaporation slows. These elevations also reduce exposure, allowing access to vegetation without leaving vertical refuge. Movement is controlled and economical. The herd follows narrow bands of growth, feeding briefly before advancing. Intake is gradual rather than immediate, relying on consistency over time instead of volume. As heat intensifies, this strategy becomes less reliable. Prolonged sunlight dries plant tissue faster, reducing available moisture. In response, activity compresses further. Movement shifts toward cooler hours, and rest replaces exploration. Pressure builds without confrontation. The cliffs that provide safety also restrict options. Each day without open water narrows the margin between conservation and depletion. Here, hydration is not a single event. It is a slow process, shaped by timing, elevation, and restraint. Daily life on the cliffs follows a strict pattern. Movement is limited and synchronized, guided by temperature and terrain rather than opportunity. The Nubian ibex travels in short intervals, conserving energy and reducing water loss. Established routes are used repeatedly. These paths balance access to vegetation with proximity to refuge. Deviating from them increases exposure without benefit. Feeding is brief and selective, preserving plants for future use and limiting the need for extended movement. During peak heat, activity slows almost to stillness. Bodies remain close to rock surfaces that provide minimal shade and thermal buffering. Reduced movement helps conserve internal moisture during the most demanding hours. Young animals follow the same rhythm, learning routes and timing through repetition. Survival depends on adherence to this system. Improvisation carries risk. What appears uneventful reflects constant regulation. Each cycle of movement and rest maintains balance between intake and conservation. In the desert mountains, daily life is defined not by expansion, but by persistence. Extended drought reduces what little flexibility remains. Vegetation dries further, and trace moisture becomes unreliable even at higher elevations. Feeding routes that once sustained the herd lose effectiveness. As reserves decline, the range shifts downward toward exposed terrain. This movement is limited but unavoidable. Each descent reduces the protection provided by height and increases visibility. Water sources become necessary rather than optional. Their locations remain open and predictable, offering no concealment. Access is timed to cooler hours, and routes favor broken terrain to limit pursuit. Time near water is kept to a minimum. Risk increases as options narrow. Drought concentrates activity across species, intensifying pressure around limited resources. Avoidance alone can no longer manage exposure. The herd persists through discipline. Controlled access replaces delay. Survival depends on precision rather than force. When margins disappear, adaptation is measured by how accurately danger is entered and exited. The desert mountains remain unchanged. Heat continues to cycle through stone. Water appears briefly and disappears again. The environment offers no stability, only repetition. The Nubian ibex does not reshape this landscape. Survival is maintained by operating within fixed limits. Drinking remains rare. Movement stays deliberate. Dependence on open water is minimized to reduce exposure. Across seasons, the species persists by requiring less rather than seeking more. Behavior remains aligned with scarcity. Timing replaces abundance as the primary tool for survival. In this environment, endurance is not defined by strength or dominance. It is defined by precision, by living accurately within what the land allows, and nothing beyond it.